Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it's Billboard Breakdown. So last week I made a very optimistic prediction, kind of naive, that Lorde would be able to challenge Ed Sheeran for the #1 spot. That she'd keep up the airplay momentum and the huge sales to seriously step up against Shape of You with Green Light. In retrospect, somebody probably should have smacked me with a big stick of reality because I was wrong in spectacular fashion. The truth is, nothing could have really stood up against Ed Sheeran this week. Divide massacred everything in its path, which meant that of our 10 new arrivals, every single one of them is from Ed Sheeran, which honestly is a little bit ironic considering that in critical circles he's sliding rapidly towards the backlash zone. Public might still like him, but a lot of critics aren't. And yep, that's not to say this week didn't have a fair amount of activity that's not related to Ed Sheeran, starting off with our top 10. But of course, Shape of You holds the #1, and why would I even expect otherwise? It's now dominant in every single category: sales, radio, streaming, YouTube, and it shows no sign whatsoever of slowing down. This is a crossover smash hit that I can't see falling off or getting challenged for at least a month now. And at this point, there's nothing remotely even close to stop it. Bad and Bougie by Migos and Lil Uzi Vert, it might have big streaming to keep it at #2, but it's losing airplay in whatever sales it's got left. That's What I Like by Bruno Mars rose up to #3 on good sales and airplay and even streaming boosts, but the margins are simply too large to be easily approached there. It's not really a challenger. It overtook I Don't Want to Live Forever by Zayn and Taylor Swift, which has even better airplay, but it's weaker on sales and took streaming losses to fall down to #4. Then we have Love on the Brain by Rihanna rising up to #5, less because it had any significant gains beyond strong airplay and more that other songs just fell a lot harder. And I have to hope on some level it's a similar case for Tunnel Vision by Kodak Black, which rose up to #6. It sure as hell's not selling or getting radio. Hell, doesn't even have YouTube at this point, just streaming. And then you get Paris by the Chainsmokers at #7, which had a bit of a weird week. A peak hit on the radio and sales gains compensated by weak streaming, which meant it didn't really go anywhere. Now, what did bounce up a place to #8 was Bounce Back by Big Sean, which also seemed to hit an airplay peak, and yeah, its streaming has some stability, but sales are weakening even further, so I'm guessing it picked up a spot thanks to weaknesses that were above it. Then we got a nice new top 10 arrival at #9, Rockabye by Clean Bandit featuring Sean Paul and Anne-Marie. I gotta say, I'm a little bit surprised that this hit everywhere else in the world actually managed to break the top 10 in the States, but I'm generally okay seeing it here. It's not a bad song, rising on sales and picking up a little bit of airplay momentum to compensate for even weaker streaming, if that's possible. And finally, tying Leanne Rimes' record for a song's longevity in the top 10, because every damn thing, it just won't work to kill this thing, despite it losing in every category. Closer by the Chainsmokers featuring Halsey is still at #10. Let's pray that something beneath it manages to rise up and kill it sooner rather than later, because I am so done with this song. And on that pleasant note, our losers and dropouts. And I gotta say, I'm pretty pleased here with the latter category. Yeah, it kinda sucks that Love Me Now by John Legend dropped out. It's not a bad song, and it's gonna miss the year at Hot 100. But when we take out No Heart by 21 Savage and Metro Boomin, Not Nice by Party Next Door, and Treat You Better by Shawn Mendes, I'm generally pleased all around. But none of this compares to the mess of losses that blew through the Hot 100 this week, and let's start off with a miserable week that Future had. Used to this with Drake dropped to 91, Draco fell hard to 77, Coming Out Strong with The Weeknd fell to 81, and Selfish with Rihanna surprisingly fell to 66. I honestly thought that song might have more longevity. Then we had the expected losses for songs that are reaching their expiry date naturally. Star of the Show by Thomas Rhett to 99, Side to Side by Ariana Grande featuring Nicki Minaj down to 50, All Time Low by John Bellion down to 45. Great song, surprisingly strong run. It's gonna make the year-end list. I'm happy about that. And finally, Can't Stop the Feeling by Justin Timberlake dropping off its big boost last week down to 24, as you would expect. Then we have drops that feel a little bit more early. I Got You by BB Rexha getting down to 67, Sober Saturday Night by Chris Young and Vince Gill down to 82, and Deja Vu by J. Cole thankfully dropping to 64. Then we've got two outliers. Slide by Calvin Harris featuring Frank Ocean and Migos getting an expected drop off the debut to 52. Don't worry, it'll rebound, at least it should. And Better Man by Little Big Town dropping to 55. Although I expect the album drop will give this a slight boost next week to keep it from really falling out of the Hot 100. But overall, I'm viewing our loss record as an understandable net positive. And yet when you look at our gains and returning entries, okay, a little less likable, but there are some promising signs. Let's get the crap out of the way first. Cold by Maroon 5 and Future went up to 20. Make Me Cry by Noah Cyrus and Labyrinth somehow got more traction up to 46. And on a slightly more tolerable entry, Mask Off by Future went up to 32. What can I say? I kind of like the sample. It's not that bad. And while I already talked about Rockabye, I'm not exactly displeased that Location by Khalid went up to 38 off the album boost, or that Rolex by Ayo and Tio went up to 48, or that Believer by Imagine Dragons somehow got another shot of life up to 41. But the rest of our gains outshone all this. Green Light by Lorde surged up to 19 and it's got momentum. They'll probably break the top 10. Redbone by Childish Gambino picked up considerable and very welcome traction back to 69. And as expected from the album, Castle on the Hill by Ed Sheeran roared up to 39. I don't know if it'll have enough to get traction at this point, but I gotta hope so. The song's great. I sure as hell would appreciate it in comparison with How Would You Feel by Ed Sheeran returning to the charts at 84. But on the topic of Ed Sheeran, and strap in folks, it's just him this week. Let's start off with number 96, Barcelona by Ed Sheeran.
Barcelona. Barcelona.
So here is the one song from Divide that I didn't cover when I reviewed the album. And spoilers, this episode will be a little shorter because, again, I already reviewed the album at length, discussed these songs in details. I want to keep this short. And that's because I didn't cover this because it was on the deluxe edition. And now, my general rule with deluxe editions, I try to avoid them. If the songs were good enough, they would have made the main album. But considering Ed Sheeran had to fight his management to get some more intricate or interesting songs on the main album, maybe it was possible in the deluxe edition where he slipped in some of his more interesting or fascinating tracks. Well, it's not a bad cut, but I definitely get why it was left in the deluxe. The lyrics, for one, play to a very basic Latin hookup, including Ed Sheeran clumsily working his way through a Spanish third verse against the electric guitar line, which raises the question why we didn't actually get a Spanish guitar progression, but never mind. I think the more distracting thing is that faint panting sound that fills up the background of most of the song against the fluttery keys and stiffer percussion, at least until we get Nicole Segal of all people showing up for the trumpet interlude. And yeah, kind of a neat choice, but I'm also left feeling that the song is a bit of an unfinished Latin gimmick, and that Ed Sheeran could have opted for a little bit more detail in the writing if he really wanted to make this into a good tribute for the city. It's not exactly a bad song, but he's definitely capable of a lot better. Number 93, Hearts Don't Break Around Here by Ed Sheeran.
Love the way that you conquer your fear. You know hearts don't break around here. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's very little to mention with this, outside of the shakes my soul like a pothole lyric and some decent, good, gentle multi-tracking. It's a pretty basic, intimate love song that Ed Sheeran can knock out in his sleep. Points for sincerity, but again, I barely remembered the song when I reviewed the album. I'm not going to remember it much here. Other words, skip it. Number 90, Eraser by Ed Sheeran.
Another one to take the sting away. I am happy on my own, so here I'll stay. Save your love in arms for a rainy day, and I'll find comfort in my pain. Eraser.
You know, I'm more forgiving of Ed Sheeran's rapping than most critics, but I'll freely admit that Eraser kind of tested my patience. Well, it's because his flow wasn't nearly as melodic, even if I actually dug the sharper edges on the choppy acoustic line. And yeah, I'm not going to deny that the double kick that opens up the slightly smoother hook, it works pretty damn well, especially off the multi-track pre-chorus. But despite all that, the emotional dynamic of the song falls into a weird space for me. It's more of a more money, more problems sort of song thematically that Ed Sheeran is trying to drown out all these problems with booze, but it doesn't really delve deeper than that. And it's an odd way to open up the album, especially given Ed Sheeran's past history with alcohol. I still like this on a compositional level. The hook is really good, but beyond that, it's good, not great. Number 83, What Do I Know by Ed Sheeran.
That I wrote, saying love could change the world in a moment, but what do I know? Love can change the world in a moment, but what do I know?
You know, I've seen this song attract some praise, and I'm really not sure why. It plays to a very bare-bones, muted guitar line against an indistinct beat, and that places all the attention on Ed Sheeran's writing, which is probably not a good idea, as his faint, generic assertions of positivity are about on par with the instrumentation in terms of forgettable pablum. And look, I get trying to avoid more politics or a social message in the music, but for as many times as Ed Sheeran references girls not fitting into their pants, you'd think that he at least used some of his platform to say something else beyond that. As it is, the song is completely hollow for me, and would attract more of my ire if it wasn't so generic and ultimately forgettable. Next, number 75, Supermarket Flowers by Ed Sheeran.
You were an angel in the shape of my mom. When I fell down, you'd be there holding me up. Spread your wings as you go. When God takes you back, he'll say hallelujah, you're home.
See, this is the sort of Ed Sheeran song I actually like, even if, as I said in the review, the subject matter makes it impossible to avoid comparisons to A Fire Love from Multiplier, which was considerably a stronger song. Hell, it was one of the best songs of 2014. But you know what? Points to Ed Sheeran for refining the details and story after his grandmother's passing into an emotionally affecting piece all the same, opting for real restraint with only gentle hints of swell on the hook to emphasize the muted, ethereal touches. And yeah, him downplaying the emotion, it actually is pretty effective, especially with the melody lines here, and especially on the outro. The only real issue I have with the song is that, well, it's not as strong as A Fire Love. But still, the sincerity and the reserve definitely makes it a potent track all the same. Definitely like the song. Check it out if you're curious. Number 72, New Man by Ed Sheeran.
If it was meant to be, you wouldn't be calling me up cause I'm positive that you don't wanna know about me. I don't wanna know about your new man. We'll get there eventually. I know you're missing all this kind of love, but I'm positive that you don't wanna know about me.
I have seen this song get so much shit in the critical backlash against this album, most of which I would argue this song doesn't deserve. For one, for as much as Ed Sheeran has contempt towards this new man for everything he does and is, he makes it plain that a fair bit of it is linked to his own jealousy of this guy for actually having his shit together. And for another, his real issue is how inauthentic his ex's gentrified steps toward normalcy feel. After all, if this is what she really wanted, she wouldn't be cheating constantly or trying to re-enter Ed Sheeran's life. What I'm trying to say is that there's more going on in the framing that at least acknowledges how small and petty it all feels, which is more than I would say for acts like, say, Drake with his concern trolling on songs like Hotline Bling, or Future with his complete inability to get the hell over Sierra. It's been a few years here, and yet somehow critics, they're getting a pass? Okay. As for the rest of the song, with the rest of the scratches, the blocky hand claps, the main acoustic line, yeah, I don't mind this. Sure, it's playing in much of the same territory as Don't, and it's not better than that song at all, but for what this is and the smaller scope and the overall pettiness of it all, I think it works. And I won't play the hypocrite and say otherwise. Number 59, Happier by Ed Sheeran.
You do. My friends told me one day I'll feel it too. And until then I'll smile and hide the truth. That I know I was happier with you. Hey, yeah, hey, yeah, hey.
Yeah, believe it or not, this song annoys me so much more than New Man. For one, the instrumentation is the sort of sparse acoustic guitar, elegant strings, and piano that's not nearly interesting enough melodically to be all that gripping. And Ed Sheeran's dipping into more of a frail falsetto range that's not at all well balanced against another indistinct beat beneath the main melody. Yeah, not his better spot in his vocals. But of course, the main focus is Ed Sheeran getting over a broken relationship and realizing that she's happier with this new guy, which blows all of its maturity in the final line when he mentions that if this guy breaks up with her, he'll be next in line to try again. Way to completely undercut the emotional through lines of your song with zero self-awareness, Ed. But again, it's less bad than it is tolerable with a bungled conclusion that makes it more mediocre. In other words, skip it. Number 53, Galway Girl by Ed Sheeran.
Fell in love with an Englishman. Kissed her on the neck and then I took her by the hands. And baby, I just wanna dance with my pretty little Galway girl. You're my pretty little Galway girl.
Look, you don't have to tell me how utterly ridiculous this track is. I believe it. I'll support it. The clunky beat with the hand claps, the wiry synths, Ed Sheeran's rapping about this girl who might as well be a caricature of the feisty Irish lass stereotype, and yet I'm a sucker for a catchy fiddle line, especially if you back it up with tin whistle and accordion. More than that, though, is that it bears a little resemblance to Take You Home by Frank Turner, a song I absolutely adore from Frank Turner's best record, Love Iron song from 2008. And considering that there was no way in hell that track was gonna chart even back then, I'll take a watered down version of it now. I really do enjoy a lot of this song. Yeah, it's goofy and kind of ridiculous, but it really does work for me in a lot of the tones. And if Ed Sheeran is going to interject more Irish and Celtic touches into his music, well, sooner the better, at least in my books. In other words, check this out. I really like this. Number 49, Dive by Ed Sheeran.
If you don't believe it, so let me know the truth before I dive right into you.
So there are a number of reasons why I think this song doesn't work for Ed Sheeran specifically, in that it's the worst track off of Divide. Part of it is that it's playing to a very stiff, staccato waltz cadence in the percussion, and especially the guitar line that calls back to old school 50s and 60s ballads, to which Ed Sheeran's rougher belting doesn't fit at all, partially because it's an oddly demanding love song where Ed Sheeran wants this girl to commit before that next step, and yet on the second verse seems to be asking some pretty basic questions about her that don't really fit in with the familiarity implied by the first verse's apology, and also partially because that next step is described as diving right into you, which alternates between being far goofier than anything on Galway, girl, and just an awful, awful line. But what I think bothers me the most here is that Ed Sheeran got Eric Clapton for the guitar solo, and then the production purposefully placed him a shade back behind Ed Sheeran's guitar line. I'm sorry, as much as I have issues with Eric Clapton, he's a legend, and you have the temerity to pull this on this stale, utterly pedestrian throwback? Ugh, no thanks, this is kinda lousy. Next. And finally, number 37, Perfect by Ed Sheeran.
Listening to our favorite song, when you said you looked a mess, I whispered underneath my breath, but you heard it, darling, you look perfect tonight.
So this is his big attempt to remake Thinking Out Loud, complete with organ, gentle acoustics, and a snap that feels oddly muffled of texture against a lush backing orchestra that of course drops into waltz cadence when the thinner jingle of percussion comes to the forefront. And you know, I'll give Ed Sheeran credit, it avoids the lyrical slip-ups that bug me so much about Thinking Out Loud. I do like the little 4 bars of deeper guitar before the final hook, but honestly, I can't be the only one who thinks that songs like this just don't play to Ed Sheeran's rougher tendencies or tones all that well. He's got a level of grit to his delivery and to some of his writing and the detail that doesn't fit with songs that feel this stuffy and polished. And while I don't doubt his sincerity, it's not a tone that I think flatters his better instincts as a singer. Still, if this was to replace Thinking Out Loud, I'd be okay with that, if only to see how Thomas Rhett would rip off his version next, and then for Nelly to cover it. So that was our week with Ed Sheeran, and honestly, despite some of my gripes, I would still say this was a good week. The album is not bad, and Ed Sheeran's worst tends to bore me more than piss me off, which is why Dive is getting the worst, along with Happier for dishonorable mention, more for completely bungling its conclusion and execution. Best? Yeah, Galway Girl's getting that, no question, with Supermarket Flowers getting the honorable mention. But next week, the fallout from all this, and until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.